a fully artificial intelligence-generated cover of Madonna's Like a Prayer climbed to number 2 on the Australian charts and racked up 48 million streams before regulators noticed no human had touched an instrument. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Tuesday, August 25th. I have had my coffee, my fleece is combed, and neither of those facts will make the next few minutes any less strange. Closer to home, Texas is busy rearranging its roads and its rosters, sometimes by literally sending drivers to the wrong side of the street on purpose. The Texas Department of Transportation has finished a new diverging diamond interchange at Loop 1604 and Blanco Road in San Antonio, a design that briefly shifts drivers onto the opposite side of the road before returning them to the correct lanes. It is part of the $279 million Loop 1604 North expansion, a project that started in late 2021 and is due to wrap by the end of this year. Motorists reported confusion navigating the crossover at first, which is a polite way of describing several thousand people learning to drive in a mirror. Transportation officials maintain the structural change has already sped up traffic through the corridor regardless. Blanco Road is now the 7th diverging diamond interchange in Texas, with an 8th planned for Interstate 37 and Southeast Military Drive. Austin City Council Member Paige Ellis has failed to qualify for a 3rd term after her re-election petition came up 62 signatures short of the 3,044 required. Municipal rules force sitting council members seeking a 3rd term to gather signatures from at least 5% of eligible voters in their district, and the city clerk rejected Ellis's submission on Monday after verification. Her campaign says its internal count showed a comfortable margin above the threshold, but they accepted the clerk's numbers without filing a legal challenge. The disqualification closes out a tenure that included the 2020 Active Mobility Bond funding sidewalks and bike lanes across the city. The clerk is scheduled to draw the final ballot order this afternoon, formalising who Ellis will no longer be running against. Fort Worth City Manager Jay Chapper has named Assistant Chief James Horton as interim fire chief while the city runs a permanent search, with Horton taking the post on August 31st in place of retiring interim chief Raymond Hill. The handoff lands in the middle of a tense standoff with the Fort Worth Professional Firefighters Local 440, which declared an impasse in its contract talks back in mid-July. Horton has nearly 3 decades in the department, including overseeing the folding of MedStar's ambulance service into the Fire Command structure. He also helped secure $34.4 million in the 2026 bond program for a new station and added 70 sworn firefighter positions through a staffing committee he coordinated. The City Council is set to formally approve his appointment at Tuesday's meeting, presumably while the union impasse continues uninterrupted in the background. Further out, the money stories today involve several governments discovering new and creative ways to make things cost more. Taiwanese prosecutors have indicted 9 people, including a current NVIDIA employee and 2 former Supermicro workers, over an operation that funneled restricted AI server hardware into mainland China. Investigators say 74 advanced servers, including B300 chips, made it to Chinese buyers through a transshipment route running through Indonesia, Japan, and Hong Kong, while another 56 were seized at the Taiwanese border before they got out. Prosecutors are seeking up to 5 years in prison for 4 of the defendants, with 3 others facing additional embezzlement charges. The charges include document forgery and breach of trust, which is a fairly restrained way to describe smuggling processes through 3 countries to dodge an export ban. Both Nvidia and Supermicro say they are cooperating with Taiwanese authorities and tightening their compliance programs. Kroger has agreed to pay $17 million to settle a federal class action lawsuit accusing the chain of overcharging pharmacy customers who used insurance rather than the discounted pricing available through its paid RX Savings Club. The suit, filed in 2021 by plaintiffs in Texas and Ohio, alleged Kroger reported inflated usual and customary prices to insurers so that ordinary customers effectively subsidized the club members' discount. Kroger denies any wrongdoing and says its subscription pricing was always meant to be separate from its standard retail rates, but settled anyway to avoid a longer court fight. Anyone who filled a prescription with insurance at a Kroger pharmacy between December 2018 and this month can file a claim with payouts by check or direct deposit based on what they spent out of pocket. The settlement still needs a judge's final sign-off, expected in January. The Department of Homeland Security has proposed a permanent $103,265 fee on every H-1B visa petition subject to the annual cap, replacing the $100,000 fee President Trump tried to impose by proclamation last year before a federal judge vacated it in June. This version runs on different regulatory authority and applies to all cap-subject petitions, including those held by foreign workers with advanced degrees from American universities. Regulators project the fee will bring in roughly $8.8 billion a year, based on an expected 85,000 paying applicants, with the money earmarked to cover the operating costs of citizenship and immigration services, customs and border protection, and the immigration courts instead of taxpayer funds. The rule opened a 30-day public comment period today and could be finalized by year's end. It is, at minimum, a very specific number to have arrived at twice. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has launched what the department is calling Operation Economic Outcast, a secondary sanctions campaign meant to cut off Iran's remaining links to the global financial system, and this builds on sanctions groundwork the administration has been laying for months. The action expands Treasury's authority to punish foreign banks, governments, and companies that help Iran move money through digital assets, gold, aviation, shipping, or technology, and it immediately hit close to 60 entities and individuals tied to Iranian military procurement, while eliminating waivers that used to allow remittances and academic exchanges. Treasury has set up a short cure period for foreign institutions to cut ties with Iranian markets voluntarily before facing total exclusion from United States financial networks. Ahead of the announcement, the Iranian rial collapsed to 2.02 million to the dollar as traders anticipated the blockade. It is functionally a financial siege with an opt-out clause and a countdown clock. The Australian Recording Industry Association has banned songs that are largely or entirely AI generated from its national music charts, requiring that eligible releases be substantially human-made, meaning actual musicians wrote the song and performed the primary instruments and lead vocals. Artists can still use AI to master a track, program drum machines, or apply auto-tune, but full synthetic generation no longer counts. The rule followed backlash after a generative AI cover of Madonna's Like a Prayer, made by someone going under the name DJ Josh Fawaz, unexpectedly hit number 2 on the charts and pulled in 48 million Spotify streams. Sweden adopted similar restrictions recently, and the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry is preparing to roll out matching guidelines across Latin America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Auto-tune, notably, remains fully human enough. The United States Department of Agriculture has reopened the commercial border crossing in Douglas, Arizona, to Mexican cattle imports ending a quarantine the Trump administration put in place in May of last year to stop the spread of the New World screwworm, a flesh-eating parasite. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed shipments have resumed through the Sonora corridor, with United States regulators planning a phased reopening of additional crossings in Texas and New Mexico. The move is part of a broader push to ease near-record retail beef prices by relieving a shortage of slaughter-ready cattle after 5 straight years of the domestic herd shrinking. Agricultural economists warn that rebuilding import volumes to historical levels will take months. Grocery shoppers looking for immediate relief at the meat counter should not hold their breath or their wallets open just yet. President Trump has threatened a 50% tariff on all Canadian cars, trucks, auto parts, and steel starting in January 2027, the latest escalation in a trade fight that already produced 50% duties on $20 billion of Canadian goods. After talks broke down last week, Trump is demanding manufacturers move their operations to the United States to dodge the penalty, and says Canada will no longer get preferential treatment. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney accused Washington of weaponizing the integrated North American supply chain to gut Canada's manufacturing sector, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford has promised serious retaliation. The 4-month runway before the tariffs kick in is widely read as leverage to drag Canadian negotiators back to the table. Both governments are now settling in for what looks like a long standoff, conducted mostly through press conferences. Away from the ledgers, the day's headline stories range from a Senate runoff to a court delay 4 decades in the making. Former President Trump's MAGA Inc. super PAC has put $827,000 into the South Carolina Senate runoff to support Senator Darline Graham against Representative Ralph Norman, funding a wave of texts and calls ahead of Tuesday's snap primary. It is the first major primary spend this cycle for the $403 million PAC, a sign of how seriously the White House is treating the seat. Graham, a political newcomer appointed by Governor Henry McMaster after the death of her brother Lindsey Graham, was forced into a runoff after missing a majority in the initial special primary. The spending follows an in-person rally by Trump in Myrtle Beach, where he framed the race explicitly as a referendum on his own influence. Republican strategists are watching the outcome closely after several of Trump's preferred candidates lost primaries elsewhere this cycle. The Supreme Court voted 6-3 along ideological lines to lift a lower court injunction that had paused. President Trump's executive order restricting mail-in voting, continuing a legal fight that has been working through the courts for months. The unsigned majority opinion reversed a Boston federal judge's ruling, finding that the Democrat-led states suing the administration had not yet shown concrete harm. The decision lets the Department of Homeland Security move ahead with a federal citizenship registry and allows the Postal Service to regulate state mail ballot designs. A separate injunction still blocks the order's most contested piece, which would require the Postal Service to independently verify the eligibility of every mail ballot recipient, and the Justice Department has already filed emergency appeals to remove that restriction too. The underlying legality of the whole overhaul remains unresolved, just in time for the midterms. More than 300 people died of Ebola in eastern Congo over the past week, one of the highest weekly death tolls in what health officials are calling the fastest growing outbreak of the virus on record. The Congolese Health Ministry has now logged 5,514 confirmed cases and 2,642 deaths, a fatality rate approaching half of everyone infected, driven by the rare Bundibugyo strain, which has produced death rates as high as 68.6% in parts of North Kivu province. There is currently no approved vaccine or antiviral treatment specifically calibrated for this strain. Frontline teams have received 16,000 doses of the Avebo vaccine, which worked against a different strain during the 2014 West African epidemic, and the World Health Organization plans to use the stockpile in immediate clinical trials to see whether it offers any cross-variant protection. The trials are starting as the outbreak is still accelerating. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. has postponed the trial of Abu Aguila Mohammed Kir al-Marimi, the Libyan intelligence operative accused of building the bomb that destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in 1988, and this delay extends a case already defined by years of procedural fights. Jury selection had been set to begin Wednesday, but defense attorneys got the delay after prosecutors handed over previously undisclosed evidence just 3 days before proceedings were due to start. The trial is now expected to begin in January 2027, stretching the wait for resolution to nearly 4 decades. The bombing killed all 259 people aboard the aircraft, along with 11 residents on the ground in Scotland, still the deadliest terrorist attack in British history. Al-Marimi, in United States custody since his extradition in 2022, continues to deny any involvement. Vitruvius Therapeutics has voluntarily recalled several batches of its prescription thyroid medication over a lack of sterility assurance and the risk of superpotent dosages after the Food and Drug Administration flagged manufacturing inconsistencies that could deliver patients severely elevated concentrations of active hormone. Regulators say the compromised tablets could rapidly trigger hyperthyroidism, pushing the body's metabolism into overdrive. Patients on the affected batches face risks including sudden weight loss, hypertension, rapid heart rate, and cardiac complications, which is an unusually dramatic list of symptoms to trace back to a pill bottle. The recall notice advises anyone holding the flagged lots to quarantine the medication immediately and consult a doctor for an alternative. The manufacturer has halted distribution of those production runs while inspectors investigate what went wrong at the facility. I keep coming back to that interchange in San Antonio, the one where they send you across to the wrong side of the road on purpose and call it an improvement. 7 of these things are operating in Texas now, with an 8th on the way, and at some point, somebody in a planning office is going to look at the traffic numbers and decide the crossover should not just be temporary. Why bother returning drivers to the correct lanes at all when the whole design already proves nobody needs to be there? Give it a few years and I fully expect a stretch of I-35 where the entire concept of a correct side has been quietly retired, filed under efficiency, and nobody in a hard hat will be able to tell you which side that ever was. The fee for a single work visa is now $103,265, a number specific enough to suggest someone ran the math twice and then kept the extra $265 out of principle. That is where I will leave it, before the diverging diamond interchange starts feeling less like an anomaly and more like a design philosophy. Lambert Woollingham, still on the correct side of the road, for now. The day has been shorn. Until tomorrow.